With so much anticipation about a prospective end to the war between Russia and Ukraine, the moves of the US president are being tracked very closely, and indeed the moves of Vladimir Putin as well, which is why it came as a surprise when the US President Donald Trump said that he was seriously worried about why Russia wasn't ending the war, going to the extent of asking whether Vladimir Putin was crazy in doing what he was doing right now. This comes obviously in the context of several strikes by Russia against Kiev in the last 48 hours. Joining us now to discuss this, Ravi Agarwal. Thanks, Ravi, very much for being with us.
Pleasure.
Did Trump end up getting ahead of himself when he felt that the war would be brought to an end in a very finite period of time?
Oh, absolutely. Trump promised that he could end the war in one day. That hasn't happened. We're now at 4 months and counting. Look, I think Trump maybe completely underestimated who Vladimir Putin is. No one has really been able to convince Putin that this war is a war that, is certainly not in anyone's interest in a global sense. And also that Russia itself, if you look at objectives and whether it's achieved any of its original goals, the jury's out. Longer term, Russia too is suffering from this. Ukraine, of course, is. But this is where Putin may not entirely be rational about his aims and outcomes. And Putin, as we know, is a man who measures himself against figures in history, Catherine the Great, Peter the Great. And so that is what he's looking at for a legacy against all odds. Even if he doesn't succeed, he must try. And I think Trump fundamentally misunderstood who he was dealing with. At this point, it's very hard for him to acknowledge that he misunderstood him. And he really has two choices. One is to make that acknowledgement and then decide to support Ukraine wholeheartedly. I doubt that's going to happen. The other more worrying outcome, Vishnu, is that he just throws up his hands in the air and says, you know what? We don't care about foreign wars. You deal with your own problems. And that is a distinct possibility at this point.
Where does that leave Europe? Because for them to have the industrial base to support Ukraine indefinitely in this conflict seems unrealistic. At the same time, Ukraine possibly doesn't have the number of soldiers they need to keep sustaining this war indefinitely. That's so far not a problem for Russia. Do you see Kiev being forced to take a call within this year?
Possibly. I mean, the thing is, this war has morphed over the last 2 or 3 years from a personnel war now to a drone-based war. Russia's attacks over the last 48 hours were overwhelmingly drones and missiles. And this is an area where Ukraine itself has become a global leader. I've visited some of its drone manufacturing plants in Kyiv, and they are absolutely cutting edge. There are many in Kyiv and Ukraine who believe that they can conduct this kind of a war. They don't have manpower, but they have an asymmetrical advantage through drone warfare. And they also think that they can get some concessions from their European allies to use missiles that go much further into Russian territory. The Taurus missiles, which come from Germany, for example, have a range of 500 kilometers. Those could strike deep into Russian territory. So, Ukraine will feel emboldened, actually. It will not want to give up immediately. And I think lastly, it will know that over the last 3 years, this conflict one thing has stayed roughly constant, that Russia has had somewhere between 18 and 22% of Ukraine's territory. It hasn't been able to expand beyond that. And Ukraine will have some confidence from that.
What would Russia's goals at this stage be?
This is unclear to me. Look, the question underlying this, Vishnu, is Putin a rational actor? Is he an actor who cares about his people? And on the first one, I think the jury's out. On the second one, no, he doesn't care about his people. He has essentially thrown hundreds of thousands of people into a meat grinder of war. The losses of life have been immense on the Russian side. They haven't confirmed it. The Kremlin hasn't. But I think he believes he can sustain this for long enough. And this is where one of the awful lessons of the last 15 or 20 years in geopolitics is that absolute repression can work if you continue to repress your people to a degree that there is no real pushback. So we see Kim Jong-un do this in North Korea. And I think Putin feels like there are no realistic challenges that he hasn't absolutely crushed. There is no popular dissent that is not absolutely crushed. So, what are the actual things that are stopping him? I will say one more thing here, though. On the economy, he has not been hit as hard as he could have been. There were additional measures both the United States and Europe could have taken to cripple Russia's shadow fleet, its exports of crude. There were more measures that they knew they were leaving on the table. And part of the reason they were is the United States, in particular, didn't want oil prices to go soaring upwards. And so there have been other means for Russian crude to hit the market. And ultimately, it is about political will.
Um, what about a potential regime change in Ukraine? Would that be something that Russia might accept? They have problems with Zelensky. Zelensky has, of course, wanted the war to continue. If Zelensky was no longer a factor, would that change what we are seeing on the ground now?
Potentially, but we don't know in which direction. We don't know who would replace Zelensky. I will say this, though. Ukrainians in general reject the idea of an election under these conditions, under wartime conditions. Zelensky has suffered in popularity in the last couple of years, but there was a reversal in that trend after Trump came to power and that infamous meeting between Trump and Zelensky at the White House, where Zelensky was sort of dressed down by Trump in a way that was seen by many in Ukraine as insulting. Ever since then, Zelensky's popularity has increased, and I think it is very unlikely that the Ukrainians would agree to elections under these conditions or to any form of regime change. It wouldn't be seen as legitimate. And of course, Russia would interfere, as it often does in many European elections. And any candidate who would replace Zelensky would be seen suspiciously by the Ukrainian people and by Europeans. So I don't think that is an option that is viable for Ukraine.
And a final question, when we were in Munich a couple of months back, the entire paradigm of NATO and America being fundamental to the defense of the continent, took a turn, some would suggest for the worse. It just disappeared overnight. If the United States is unable to resolve the war between Russia and Ukraine, it would go to prove that what European leaders were saying is correct or entirely correct. Um, would America potentially reconsider the statements made by J.D. Vance in Munich and perhaps acknowledge that look perhaps that Europe may be right and Russia is a force which needs to perhaps be tackled with American assistance?
The jury's out here. There are many theories on the American side about what America sees as its role in the world. There's a faction that sees on the MAGA side that America should not be the world's policeman. There's another faction that believes in spheres of influence, in that America controls much of the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere could be carved up by China and Russia, which is very much this term, spheres of influence, was first used in 1884 in Berlin at a carving up of the world. And it sort of implies a return to an imperial era that, frankly, no one around the world wants to go back to. I think all of that ultimately is unlikely. We don't know where the United States will land. What we do know is that Europe is going to plow ahead with reinventing, reconstituting its defense industrial base, with dramatically upping defense spending. Many European countries are now talking about 5% of their GDP on defense spending. Some of this could go to roads and bridges, which are used to transport heavy military artillery. I think those are trend lines that have begun. And I think those are trend lines that will continue into the future. 10, 15 years from now, there's little doubt in my mind that Europe will be militarily way more self-sufficient than it currently is today. Those trends have been set in motion. The here and now is a bigger problem, Vishnu, because Europe cannot fully support Ukraine to the extent that it needs. And that is why this is as much of a problem as it is. It is fairly likely, because of these sort of timing issues that we may see some sort of a not a ceasefire, but a stalemate where the two sides continue to wage this drone warfare without making significant advances on the battlefield until there is some real diplomatic movement. The question is, who's going to push that through? Trump himself has said that maybe the new pope should do that. And of course, there is no recorded history of a pope having solved a global conflict.
All right, Ravi, that's actually a fascinating thought. Let's see what finally happens. It's so sad that so many people continue to lose their lives every single week in Ukraine. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. Thanks very much indeed.